So, how exactly does a relatively small, kind of under the radar business transaction end up completely reshaping the strategic chessboard of an entire ocean? Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really brilliant move that blends corporate acquisition with massive geopolitical implications, playing out right now in the heart of the Indian Ocean. Okay, let's dive into this. $26.8 million. I mean, think about that. In the grand scheme of global economics, this amount barely buys you a luxury penthouse in a major city like New York or London. But in the incredibly high-stakes world of maritime strategy, this precise amount just secured India a massive, game-changing foothold. Let's look at exactly how that happened. Section 1, the $26 million deal. Let's set the stage. On one side of the table, we've got Mazagon Dock Shipbuilders Limited, or MDL. They're India's state-owned premier builder of warships and submarines, based out of Mumbai. Now, on the other side, we have Colombo Dockyard PLC, or CDPLC. This is Sri Lanka's absolute flagship commercial shipyard. But recently, CDPLC was left in a highly vulnerable financial spot after Japan's Onomichi Dockyard decided to exit the project. Seeing this massive cap, the Mumbai-based MDL stepped right in to take operational control of the struggling yard. Now, what's really interesting here is that 51% stake for roughly 249.5 crore rupees, which again is our $26.8 million. MDL didn't just buy a little minority share. No, they acquired a controlling stake. They now have majority ownership and management control. The entire board has been reorganized, and it's now sitting under the leadership of MDL's own non-executive chairman, Captain Jagmohan. They've essentially moved in, unpacked, and set up shop. Section 2, Why Colombo Dockyard Matters. To put this into perspective, a staggering 60% of India's transshipment cargo is handled by the Colombo port alone. I mean, that is a huge chunk of trade. The port sits directly on the incredibly busy east-west shipping route. So by taking ownership of a major industrial facility right there inside the port, India instantly shifts its entire status. It goes from just being a massive customer relying on a foreign port to actually being an owner, an active stakeholder with a firm hand on the pulse of its own global trade flow. And the location? It literally gets even better. The shipyard sits just 40 nautical miles from the approach to the Strait of Malacca. That is practically next door in ocean terms. This proximity instantly upgrades India's strategic reach, granting them a solid, anchored position right at one of the world's most critical global trade bottlenecks. Section 3, Countering China's Maritime Push. All right, so you've probably heard of the string of pearls strategy, right? This is China's well-documented geopolitical approach of building bases along critical maritime choke points. A major pearl in this network is the 99-year lease that China holds on Sri Lanka's Hambantota port. Well, India's acquisition of the Colombo dockyard is widely seen as a direct strategic counterbalance to that. In fact, it places an Indian state-owned entity directly into the exact same port where Chinese-linked companies currently operate the Colombo International Container Terminal. Talk about high-stakes proximity. But we really shouldn't view this shipyard deal as some random, isolated event. Over the past decade, Indian companies have been steadily building up a multi-layered infrastructure presence in the area. Things like the Lanka IOC fuel network and the Adani Group's Colombo West terminal. Then, during Sri Lanka's recent financial crisis, India really stepped up as a first responder, offering vital emergency fuel and economic aid. So when CDPLC reported those significant financial losses in 2023, the stage was already perfectly set for MDL to step in and finalize this 51% acquisition. It's essentially a long-term relationship that just culminated in strategic ownership. Section 4, India's Master Maritime Plan. And this brilliantly illustrates a much bigger, long-term master plan. Under what's called the Maritime Amrit Kaal Vision 2047, India is aiming to become a leading global shipbuilding nation. Grabbing the Colombo dockyard gives MDL a dedicated space to really expand into commercial ship repair, which helps them diversify away from just building warships. Crucially, it also gives India a reliable Indian-controlled facility abroad where they can eventually service their own naval and coast guard ships. And you know what? The commercial victories from this partnership are literally already rolling in. With MDL's backing, the dockyard just secured its absolute largest contract in its 52-year history, a $150 million deal with France's Orange Marine to build advanced cable-laying vessels. They've also signed an agreement with the Dredging Corporation of India, and they're actively negotiating vessel repairs with the Shipping Corporation of India. By bringing all this work in-house at an offshore facility, India dramatically cuts down its reliance on much more expensive foreign port facilities. It's a huge win. Section 5. The risks and uncertainties. So, the crucial point here is balancing reality. It's not all smooth sailing. On the one hand, the strategic gains are massive. You get deep water access and a powerful counterbalance to Chinese infrastructure. But look at the risks. CDPLC was literally bleeding money in 2023, and MDL, well, they're experts at building state-of-the-art submarines and warships, but they severely lack experience in running a profitable, day-to-day commercial ship repair yard. Plus, we can't ignore the intense geopolitical pressure this places squarely on Sri Lanka, which leads us to some pretty major lingering uncertainties. I mean, can MDL actually turn this unprofitable yard around and fully integrate it into global supply chains? Will future domestic governments in Sri Lanka continue to play ball and support this Indian partnership? We also have to wonder how China's going to react. Are they going to expand their naval outreach or maybe flood the zone with more subsidized projects? And perhaps the biggest question of all, will this commercial facility eventually be used to maintain foreign navies? Sri Lanka is walking a razor-thin tightrope right now between two massive powers, trying desperately not to escalate regional tensions. There's a quote from the source material that really hits the nail on the head here. It says, "It strengthens India's position not through military force alone, but through steady and well-planned involvement in the region's economic systems." Honestly, this $26 million acquisition is a masterclass in modern geopolitics. It's all about securing that long-term influence through commercial infrastructure, rather than just strictly relying on military deployment. So I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on. Who will ultimately control the future of the Indian Ocean's supply chains? Because as we've seen today, power isn't just determined by the size of a naval fleet anymore. It's heavily influenced by who quietly holds the commercial anchors at the world's most critical choke points. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.